with us if you can. Want to bring in a panel. Can new candidates like the Colonel help bring back trust in government? Scoring it tonight is Fox News contributor Monica Crowley, Penn Financial's Matt McCall, and in L.A., Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall. Leslie, first of all this stuff that we're hearing this week particularly that is misrepresenting the figures. I mean, we heard Robert Gibbs say that by virtually any measure, the economy is better off now than 2 years ago. When you look at unemployment, you look at debt, you look at housing, and that just is not true. How is the average person supposed to deal with all this stuff?
Well, first of all, the average person needs to separate the facts from fiction, and there is some fiction, if you will, or embellishment coming out on both sides, and that's typical when you have an election so close as we do in November. So the American people need to educate themselves, and they should be educating themselves not only because they're going to hear political rhetoric from both sides, but especially during an election time, and that education is only going to bode better for them and for our nation when they're educated and making informed decisions when they go to vote.
That's a good way of putting it. Monica, what do you think?
First of all, I want to give a big shout out to my good friend Alan West, who is a fine man and an extraordinary American. Alan, good luck to you heading into this election. America would be very well served by having him in the Congress. Look, I think this time around you're dealing with a completely different kind of election cycle and a completely different kind of electorate. And that's why we have seen being kicked up extraordinary candidates like Alan West. You see Nikki Haley, you see Sharon Engel, you see Joe Miller in Alaska. These are honest-to-God, real, authentic Americans who are not professional politicians, who have decided to take time out of their lives to go serve their country because they think their country has been taken off the cliff, Thelma and Louise-like. And so what you're seeing, I think...
hold on, Thelma and Louise-like?
Well, you know,
I haven't seen any guns blazing.
President Obama likes to use the analogy of, oh, the Republicans took the car in the ditch. Well, that didn't give him excuse to back the car up and then drive it right off the cliff.
I wouldn't go that far, but Matt...
Where's my violin? Where's my violin, Monica?
Hold on a second. She's got the world's tiniest violin. The fact is that the administration is not owning up to certain facts. For example, their budget. The budget of the president and Treasury Secretary Geithner says is dependent upon 4% growth. Right now, we have an anemic 1.6% growth. They have to face a reality that their original budget, their original plans haven't worked. It has to be recalibrated, and they're not doing it.
And you know, David, I'm pretty optimistic when it comes to the economy compared to a lot of people in my situation, and I think 4% is unrealistic, to be honest with you. So they have to take that back.
Well, it was from the get-go, but the fact is it's so much less than 4%. Right. 1.6%, that translates into trillions of dollars of difference.
Absolutely. And David, to Leslie's point, she said Americans need to educate themselves. I think Americans have educated themselves over the last year because you're seeing it in the polls. When the incumbents are not getting back in, I think we're going to see that even more going forward. And it comes down to confidence. I talk to investors every single day, the individual investors in the middle of this country, and they have zero confidence in our government right now. And we will see that in the polls. And that goes back to the fact that they are educating themselves. They are becoming educated when it comes to the numbers and the statistics, because we can take the numbers and we can put any type of spin on them.
Leslie, I saw you shaking your head no. Go ahead.
Well, honestly, you know, I'm sorry, it's the economy, stupid. If the economy was great, the incumbents would be great. And it's a precarious slope, I think, sending a lot of people with absolutely no experience to Washington who think they won't be tainted by lobbyists.
Well, the experienced ones haven't done a very good job at it, Leslie, have they? Whether you're talking Republicans or Democrats.
I don't disagree, but I've always been one that says we have the power of term limits with our vote, and we don't exercise that. And if everybody out there is saying they're so different, then put in, David, I think you even agree with me on this, put an I next to your name, not an R or a D, because you will see they will be swept up as freshmen in that Congress to vote with their party.
You talk about being experienced. Being an experienced politician does nothing for me, does nothing for this economy. What does something for this economy is somebody's actually run a business before.
Okay, and also, Colonel West, I want to get back to this point. The fact that the president is going back to his old record. What we saw yesterday was not a willingness to compromise, but just the opposite. He was drawing a line in the sand. As a military guy, you appreciate that. But the fact is he's not recognizing the economy is not doing what he thought it would do. They based their budget on 4% growth. We have 1.6% growth. They based the stimulus on the fact that it would keep unemployment at 8%. It is now close to 10%. So all of their projections have turned out to be wrong, and yet he's going with the same military game plan in the economy. That's bad strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the things that they teach you as a commander and a leader is that anytime you go into an operation, no matter what type of plan you have, the enemy has a vote. And normally when that first bullet flies, that plan has to go out out the door, and you have to be very flexible and very adaptable. So what I think we're seeing are some very rigid ideologues that are not willing to be flexible and make the adjustments, kind of like a quarterback coming up and reading the defense, and he calls an audible because if you stick with the same play, you're probably going to have a loss for yardage. And right now we're suffering a lot of losses for yardage. But I also want to talk about something that Leslie brought up. We do have to have a better educated electorate out there right now, because even though you have the 2 years to elect a member of the House, or the 4 years for a president, or the 6 years for the Senate, we find that in the past people have not really paid attention. And also when you talk about experience, I think that when you look at the background that I have, I was 28 years old when I was commanding 131 soldiers and had almost a $5 million budget for my unit.
That's a lot of good experience. Yep, absolutely. Monica wanted to get in. Go ahead, Monica.
To Alan's point here, this is what the Founding Fathers intended for our legislators. They expected citizen legislators. They wanted people who would take time out of their own professional careers and their lives to maybe go to Washington or their state capitals and represent their communities well, and then go back to their lives. Alan West is embodying what the Founding Fathers intended perfectly.
If Alan West, you keep to your formula and term limit yourself. Some guys have dropped that promise after it's been made, but we're going to hold you to it. Colonel West, thank you very much for coming in. Monica, Matt, and Leslie, we'll see more of in just a moment. Absolutely. Coming up on deck, Donald Trump offers a 25% premium. The Koran burning extinguished. That story topping tonight's 2-minute drill. Let's welcome back our panel. We have Matt McCall, Monica Crowley, and Leslie Marshall. Let us fire up the clock. As mentioned, Florida clergyman Terry Jones calling off his Koran burning protest after claiming to reach a deal with Muslim leaders to move the proposed mosque near Ground Zero. Now, center organizers say no such deal exists. So what's the reaction to this? What are we to make of this, Monica?
This is such a completely bizarre story from beginning to end. We don't know what the situation is. I'm glad that this pastor is not going to do this. We are getting a report that the Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, actually placed a phone call to
It's more
Mr.
than a
Jones.
report. The Pentagon has confirmed that happened.
Right, and he's backing up General Petraeus, who said, look, if this goes forward, I'm going to deal with an even heightened state of violence here in Afghanistan. Please don't make my job harder than it already is. But the question is, it's amazing that we're being lectured to by this imam and by others about religious tolerance from people who wrote the book on religious intolerance. And this idea that somehow Islamic extortion is going on, with the imam saying, look, if we move this, you're going to have extra violence, and you're going to have extra violence if we burn the Quran. That is the bigger point, David, that we all need to be educated on.
Leslie, I'm just wondering, just as a reporter, this guy apparently got the wrong message that the mosque is being moved, because we just heard that it's not.
No, this guy is just trying to have more of his 15 minutes or seconds of fame. Actually, David, it's funny. Yesterday, he said that he and his congregation were going to pray about this. So I would imagine God told them it was a bad idea.
Well, Robert Gates certainly told him it was a bad idea. Maybe that had more influence than anything.
It definitely had influence. I mean, I'm not sure what went on behind closed doors, but obviously I think Gates had a big influence on him stopping this, because I think it is a national security issue, as Monica brought up. In my mind, it's two complete radicals. The imam and a clergyman in Florida are both very radical. I don't think they speak for the masses of their religions, and I'm glad to see that they're not going to be doing that, but now time to move the mosque.
Last word, Nebraska Senator Ben Nelson throwing his support to extend the Bush tax cuts. Now, Nelson's move is the latest in a growing divide among Democrats over taxes. The list includes former Budget Director Peter Orszag, as we mentioned, who proposed extending the tax cuts earlier in the week. So, Leslie, what is a Democratic Party to do with people like Orszag and Ben Nelson and others who are more moderate?
I don't know. I guess being that I'm left of the moderates, vote them out, or, you know, tell them to put an I or an R next to their name. Certainly, if you're going to be part of a party, whether it's a Democratic or Republican party, you need to align yourself with that party or separate yourself from it, as Joe Lieberman did.
Yeah, you know, Monica, I got to say, I totally disagree with the president's policy on this, on a whole range of elements. I think it's the worst thing you could do at a time like this in the economy. But at least he's saying, this is where I stand. I'm not going to move.
He drew a line in the sand.
He makes him, he's an easy person to distinguish now. now in this thing.
I mean, Obama didn't pull his usual on the one hand. On the other hand, he actually drew a line in the sand. Look, Peter Orszag, his first statement after leaving the budget job in the White House, comes out and says extend all of the Bush tax cuts, basically saying, look, I'm looking to President Bush for a lifeline here on the economy after trashing Bush, all the Democrats for 2 years. Look, I think you got to look at the history. Every time there has been a reduction in the marginal tax rates from John F. Kennedy through Ronald Reagan to George W. Bush, you've seen added revenue into the Treasury. Tax cuts work not just for individuals and small and big businesses, but also for the government.
We're not even talking about tax cuts. We're talking about leaving taxes where they are.
I mean, this is simple economics, really. There's certain days I wake up in the morning, I look at the television, I think to myself, has President Obama ever had a simple economics class, intro to economics, because it makes 0 sense, and Wall Street shows that, because when they talk about this, you see Wall Street and stock markets fall, and that really rules our economy, so they need to be extended, and I hope that God, they are. For my client's sake.
He's about to cry here on national television. All right, President Obama taking on House Minority Leader John Boehner several times in his speech yesterday. Take a look.
Let me be clear to Mr. Boehner. In fact, when Mr. Boehner was here in Cleveland, when these same Republicans, including Mr. Boehner, these same Republicans turned a record surplus into a record deficit.
Now, Obama mentioned Boehner a total of 8 times. Is targeting Boehner a good political move for the president? Monica, what do you think?
Here's the deal. For the last 2 years, actually more, President Obama's been targeting George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and made them the antichrists. That no longer is working. People are over that. And actually, President Bush is looking pretty good, relatively speaking, here. So now he's got to find another demon, and it's John Boehner. But this is not a good move because, you know what? Most Americans, including a lot of Republicans, don't give a flying whit
well,
about
actually, Leslie, it's a great point. Most Americans don't know who John Boehner is.
That's pretty sad. That's where education comes in. But I have to say, Monica, Republicans are still blaming Bill Clinton, and he hasn't been in the White House for much longer. But when we look at what the president was doing, I don't think it's demonizing. I think it's addressing a man that has been demonizing him, and he's in the state of Ohio, in Cleveland, where John was standing saying these things about the president. So now John Boehner has to say,
I'm rubber and you're glue, and everything you say bounces off me and sticks to you. Is that right,
Hey, this is politics.
That's the next step.
My mother, your mother wears army boots.
Exactly.
Kind of a season.
I mean, that's why. Is there any wonder why America doesn't like politics right now?
No, I mean, it's like a Mad Lib. They just took out the word Bush and put in Boehner. They just, just bashed him instead. You know, really, when you bash somebody else in politics, it tells me that you don't have any type of solution to the problem. I mean, if President Obama really had a solution to this issue right now, I think he'd be talking about that. But the only thing that he has is to bash somebody else. So you're playing the same game as Boehner.
Matt's got the last word again coming up on deck. It's sort of official.